Welcome back to my channel. When Leica's Firmware 3.0 for the Leica SL2 came to market for download, I reviewed all the new features of the Leica SL2, which came with that new firmware. And in that context, I also spent some time with the Sigma telezoom from the Sport series, which you see here indicated by that little S in the hologram here. And that's a lens with 150mm up to 600mm, and the aperture changes depending on the level of zoom between f5 and f6.3. And when I posted my video on the firmware 3.0 for the Leica SL2, I also promised to upload a video where I used this particular lens for moon photography. This is what this video here is all about. I'm going to share my footage and the shooting process. Let's get started. I will keep this video very short because my main purpose with this video is to demonstrate that the Leica SL2 in the multi-shot mode combined with that Sigma Sports telezoom from 150 to 600mm is capable of taking pinpoint sharp photos of the moon. And I talked about moon photography on various occasions on my channel, and the rule of thumb for moon photography is very simple. Go for a comparably low ISO value and a comparably fast shutter speed. And the reason why this rule of thumb works is because the moon itself is already a very bright object on the night sky compared to a very dark background. And that's why you do not go as typical in night photography for high ISO values and long exposure. You do exactly the opposite. You go for low ISO and comparably fast shutter speed. Now, 600mm focal length to take shots of the moon, of course, is already very close and is in the more extended tele area, but it's not good enough to get a high resolution shot of the moon. So what I also did is, between the camera body and the lens, I mounted an extender, which is also from Sigma here. So this is the 1.4 times extender, as you can see here on the engraving, and it's for the L-mount system. So that I combined with the lens, which brought me up from 600mm to 840mm. And clearly 840mm is closer than 600mm, but still not good enough. And the sensor of the Leica SL2 has 47 megapixels, so if I crop in, I have to crop in deeply to get the moon in full size. And what you can do on the Leica SL2 is the multi-shot option here on that Leica camera. So if I go here into drive mode, I can actually switch here to multi-shot. And I can also tweak this in the menu, of course. If I go here into drive mode, there are a couple of parameters. I can say I want to have a self timer, which I always use. And I also can have motion artifacts correction, which doesn't harm to have it switched on. And then with the multi-shot, the camera actually takes consecutive frames. I think it's up to 8 frames, and combines them into one single image with then 187 megapixel of resolution. And that gives me much more crop reserves. So I get almost 4 times the resolution of the original sensor resolution, which means I can combine the 840mm with a 4 times resolution, then crop in, and in this way get a crisp and very nice moonshot. If fully mounted, this lens with the extender on the Leica SL2 is a pretty impressive tool for moon photography. Of course, I played with different settings when it comes to ISO, shutter speed, aperture and so on, and then I started the multi-shot, and the camera takes then 8 consecutive frames. Very important, with no pause or break between the frames, because the moon is moving, the earth is rotating, and then these frames are stacked together in camera by an in-camera algorithm to an 187 megapixel image. As a side remark, it's important to note that an extender always changes the widest open aperture at the prescribed focal length. So at 150mm we had widest open f5. With the extender that changes to an f7, and at 600mm we had widest open f6.3, and that changes with the extender to an f9 and an overall focal length of 840mm as mentioned before. So here are 2 shots I want to quickly compare. On the left hand side we have the standard resolution for the Leica SL2, 46.7 megapixel, and on the right hand side we have the multi-shot version of it. It's 186.9 megapixels, so the 187 megapixel I talked about before. Let's quickly talk about shooting parameters. I went for the lowest ISO possible on the Leica SL2, which is an ISO 50. And I said before, the trick on moon photography is go for comparably low ISO, which I did here with ISO of 50, and for comparably fast shutter speed. And very often the reciprocal rule works very well. So if I have here an ISO of 50, I can shoot actually with 1/50 seconds as exposure time. And the aperture I closed fairly down, so I stopped it down to f13. And clearly, since we have 4 times the resolution on the right hand side compared to the standard 47 megapixel on the left hand side, if I now go into 100% crop here, I get of course much more crop reserves on the right hand side with the 187 megapixel. And I think that's the first observation I made here. When the camera shoots these 8 consecutive frames in the multi-shot setup, based on the fact that the camera doesn't take any break or pause between the shots, 8 frames with 1/50 seconds is quick enough so that there is not a lot of impact coming from the moon moving or Earth rotating, and that means that the stacked image looks pretty nice and gives you plenty of crop reserves at 187 megapixel resolution. What you see here now is on the left hand side the crop into the multi-shot image, which you saw before on the right hand side. And Lightroom indicates here that this has a resolution of 17.3 megapixel. And what I did on the right hand side is I used a software I use from time to time. It's artificial intelligence based. It's called Topaz Gigapixel AI, and you can use this to scale up lower resolution images. And that's exactly what I did with the left hand side. So I scaled up 17.3 megapixel to 69 megapixel on the right hand side. And that gives me a bit more flex in order to get higher print dimensions if I wanted to print that image here. I guess it's very hard to recognize, even if watched in 4K on a TV or on your smartphone, that there are tiny little differences between the left hand side and the right hand side. But I can assure you, if I want to go for a larger dimension print, the right hand side after using Gigapixel AI is a tiny little bit better in terms of quality than the original crop into the multi-shot image. So here's the final image. I've taken many moon shots over many years, but this particular image here is one of the best I've ever taken, and I like it a lot. I hope you liked that video. I think that moon image is really nice, and I think it's also nice that on the Leica SL2 you can actually use the multi-shot technology for getting the higher resolution image and then having more reserves if you crop in at 840mm focal length, if the extender is included here, and then get the shots I just showed in the sample images. If you liked that video, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel, there's always more to come. Stay safe and healthy, and of course, peace out.